All right, so let's just jump in and quickly overview all of the different tools and other things that we're going to take a look at in this course. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at our fundamentals, and that's going to be Node and NPM. Now, in order to work with these tools, you're going to have to understand Node. There's just no way around it because all of this is executed using Node. To put it simply, if you're not familiar with that technology, Node is a project where somebody took the Chrome web browser, ripped out its JavaScript engine, and plopped it into something that can be executed on the command line. And it's really simple as that. It's called server-side JavaScript. That's generally what you'll see it referred to as. But it's not necessarily always going to be running a server, as we're going to see many examples of in this course. So I again have to reiterate, just because we are using Node doesn't mean we're writing the web server in Node. Now, we will be writing some basic web service in Node to get a good idea of how it works, and as an introduction for Node for people who are curious about it and might want to play around with it some more. But again, most of the time, we're going to be using the Node execution engine simply to process our assets and run through our build tasks and all of that fun stuff. And if you were writing a production application in ASP.NET or PHP, that's how you would execute your Node. You wouldn't use it to build your web server, you would use it to process your assets outside of your web server. We'll also be talking about NPM, a very, very, very important thing. NPM is one of the reasons why Node is awesome, because it is the package manager, and there are many, many, many awesome packages and utilities available to it. Most of the things that we're going to be looking at, in fact, pretty much everything we're going to be looking at, will be acquired through NPM. So we need to understand Node as the thing that runs our stuff, and then we need to understand NPM as the thing that gives us awesome stuff to run. Now, a side note, I did earlier say that VS 2015, which is available for free, will work very well with Node and NPM. It has built-in support for understanding these platforms and these tools. We will not be using Visual Studio 2015 in this course, and I recommend you don't. There are a handful of reasons why, and I provide an alternative that we'll talk about later in this video, and we'll discuss this more in depth in the coming videos. But at the end of the day, the biggest reason is that I wanted to use a cross-platform editor that everybody can follow along with. Next up are the languages we're going to take a look at. And we're going to take a look at Less and ECMAScript 2015. So Less is a CSS preprocessor. It makes working with CSS a whole lot easier. And although this course is not about styles, I wanted to introduce it for a handful of reasons. First of which is, if you're not using a CSS preprocessor, either Less or Sass, in 2016, I highly encourage people to make that switch and start using them. They are very, very handy. They really clean up your CSS, makes working with their styles a whole lot better, or easier rather. However, I also introduced Less for another reason. When we start talking about our build tools and our asset pipeline and how we do our optimizations, I needed an additional thing for our styles to show you guys how you would introduce, in addition to writing modern JavaScript, how you would write modern CSS using these build tools. I felt that it would be a little bit incomplete if I didn't include how we would work with styles. So I threw in a introduction to Less in this series, and we will be using Less throughout it. Next up is ECMAScript 2015, also known as ES 2015, also known as ES6. So ECMAScript 2015 is the official name for ES6. Now, what is ECMAScript? I thought we were talking about JavaScript. Well, ECMAScript is the specification for JavaScript. When it comes down to a matter of language and where we would use them. You could use them interchangeably in some circumstances, but you would never say JavaScript 2015 or JavaScript 6. You would say ECMAScript 2015 or ECMAScript 5. And when we're talking, and we're just talking about writing JavaScript, we'll just say JavaScript. So I'm writing JavaScript right here. But then if somebody turns around and asks me, what feature set are you using? You know, what version of the language are you using? Then I would respond to them, I'm using ES 2015 or I'm using ES5. So although they, in some ways they're synonymous, in some ways they're not, and they have a different connotation when you're speaking to somebody about them. But the reason I'm specifically saying ECMAScript 2015 here is because it's literally the future of JavaScript. It was standardized. There's a lot of support for it in modern browsers. But in addition to that, this entire course is about how we can use all of those awesome features that were just standardized this year. How can we use them today? Even, on IE6, like, I don't know if anybody listening works somewhere that IE6 is mandatory, but if you do, there's still no reason not to use ECMAScript 2015 features. So I already said this, but I'll reiterate. ECMAScript 2015 is the official name for, or I guess has been decided on in the community, for what was formerly known as ES6. And then ES7 is going to be most likely called ES 2016. So they're really, really working on revamping the language year by year, which is awesome because we get a very tight feedback loop. But most importantly, the stuff I'm going to show you guys, you don't have to worry about all those features coming out and browsers not supporting them. We're going to see how we can use these tools that are outlined below on the left to work with these features right now. Next up are the tools we're going to look at. So first of all, we have Gulp, which is a JavaScript task runner. So if you're not familiar with the concept of a task runner, it is a little command line utility that runs tasks. It's kind of in the name. But it's something similar to like MS Build, for example, or Ant or whatever, except it's not awful. And Gulp allows us to describe little things that we want to automate in JavaScript, and then it'll go out and it'll execute that in its own environment. Well, specifically the Node environment. So it's kind of pretty much become the de facto JavaScript task runner over the last couple of years, and it's a very, very awesome utility that we will take a very, very close look at. We're going to talk about everything from how to use it to how to build our own plugins and its own internals, so that hopefully I remove as much magic away from it as possible and people understand what's going on when they're using it. So primarily, you're going to use Gulp to process your assets. You're going to write little Gulp tasks with Gulp plugins that go out and do things like, hey, take our less code and turn it into CSS so our browsers can render it. Or take our ES 2015 code and turn it to ES3 code so our browsers can run it. And those are the kind of tasks that we're going to be building. Now, you're not limited to just transforming assets with Gulp. In theory, you can use Gulp just to run any arbitrary JavaScript code that you want. And it's a very, very, very handy tool, and it also has fantastic support in Visual Studio 2015. So to all you ASP.NET developers out there listening, this is definitely a tool that Microsoft is very much encouraging people start using in their asset pipeline for modern ASP.NET. Next up, we have Bower. There's not a whole lot to say about Bower. It's a front-end, lightweight package manager. We'll be introducing it just to allow us to easily pull down scripts when we need them for our examples. Now, another thing about Gulp is we are going to be using Gulp 4. Now, hopefully, all you future people, Gulp 4 was released. Unfortunately for me, Gulp 4 was not. It's currently, as it stands, version 3 is what's on the public registry. So in the video, I show you guys what to do and how to check to see if 4 was released yet. And then I show people if Gulp 4 has not been released yet, how to download it. In addition to all of that, we will be using Gulp 4 throughout the entirety of our course. But I do have a video talking about the differences with Gulp 3. So if you go through all the Gulp 4 stuff and then want to work on a Gulp 3 project, I have a video that goes over just the primary differences. There's not a whole lot as far as how you work with it that's different. And so basically, at the end of our section on Gulp, you'll have a good understanding of Gulp 4 and Gulp 3. But I recommend people use Gulp 4 for new projects. Alrighty, let's talk about the big one. I think probably the most important section of this series, and that is modules. So a module is basically a way to combine multiple assets intelligently. What do I mean by assets? I mean fonts, I mean images, I mean JavaScript files and styles, and anything that your browser is going to download. The concept of modules is pretty much to have all of your files depend on each other in an intelligent way, so that you don't run into situations when you're writing your web application where, oh, this script hasn't been loaded, or oh, this script was loaded before this other script, and it just becomes a huge mess. This fixes all of that. This is one of the, in addition to using ES 2015 starting today, or at least starting after you finish this course, I very much encourage people to start using some sort of module loader or some sort of module bundler. I'm going to show you guys it's not that scary, and you have options depending on your needs. We're going to take a look at 4 of them. We're going to take a look at Require.js, Browserify, Webpack, and we're going to take a short look at JSPM. So Require.js is the most mature one. It's stable, it's well known, and has a bundler for production. So it's primarily, it loads up your JavaScript files in your browser, but when you move to production, you can run it through a special Require.js utility that'll turn all of your individual JavaScript files into one. So that's pretty neat. Browserify is a bundler. It's not a loader, so basically it's just responsible for taking a JavaScript file that has dependencies, grabbing those dependencies and their dependencies, and merging them into a single file. But what's cool about it is it's dead simple to use. It's so easy to use, and you can load assets from the server and have them rendered on in your client code. So that's really, really cool thing. Then we have Webpack. Webpack is, in more ways than one, more similar to Browserify than Require.js, but it's very comprehensive and powerful and comes with an excellent development workflow. So we're going to take a look at how we can use the Webpack dev server to drastically speed up our development. Webpack is a little bit more complex to set up and understand and configure, but we will walk through all of the major configuration options in this series, and I highly encourage you to definitely check out Webpack. Then we'll look at JSPM. JSPM is all of that stuff plus a package manager. JSPM, I believe in the next couple of years, is going to become more and more used, but for reasons that I will explain when we talk about it, I'm not necessarily certain that it is the best choice for web development or modern or current web development today. But I do put in a short couple videos on it just to get you guys aware of it and how it works and why one might choose to use it or choose not to use it. Alright guys, I promise I'm wrapping up, but I have one more note to make here. We are going to be using, or I am going to be using, Visual Studio Code. You can use whatever text editor you want, it just needs to be able to edit text. You could use Notepad if you wanted to, but obviously, for obvious reasons, don't recommend it. So I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is free, open source, and it runs on macOS, Windows, and Linux. And I really like it. I really like it as a lightweight text editor. It replaced Sublime for me, to be honest with you. But you can follow along in whichever editor you want. So following along, I encourage you guys to actually type out the majority of what I'm going to be typing out. Now, almost all of the stuff we're going to be doing here is just going to be one-off scripts where I show you a feature or how this feature works or something like that and throw together an example. But getting things kind of encoded into your muscle memory, I think, is very, very, very important. So I really, really encourage people to follow along and type out most of this stuff and to kind of gain a more deeper appreciation of what we're doing. And we do have an example app. It's just a really small example app that we work with all the different module loaders and bundlers on, and that source code is available if you just want to play around with installing the bundler themselves but don't want to write out the example app. You can go ahead and download the source from this video. But I think that wraps it up. So I guess let's go ahead and get started. I hope you guys enjoy the course.